Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 717 of People Behind the Science. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I am joined today by our guest, Dr. Hongkui Zeng, to talk about life and science. This episode is made possible with support from our sponsor, Innovative Research. Listeners, Innovative Research has provided scientists with quality lab products made in Novi, Michigan for more than 20 years. Their portfolio includes human and animal biologicals, assays and ELISA kits, antibodies, and more. Products can be purchased directly from their website by credit card or purchase order at www.innov-research.com. That's www.innov-research.com. They offer small quantities, bulk purchases, and custom orders. From human whole blood to specialized antibodies, Innovative Research has what you need to succeed in the lab. And today, our guest Hongkui is going to talk more about her research as well as her life outside of science. So listeners, get ready to meet another one of our brilliant people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Hongkui Zeng. So, Hongkui, welcome to the show today. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Well, we are so excited to have you with us today, and I'm looking forward to learning more about you and your work. But first, let me give our listeners a little bit of an idea of how you got to where you are today. So, listeners, Hongkui is Executive Vice President and Director of the Allen Institute for Brain Science. She received her bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Wuhan University and her PhD in molecular and cell biology from Brandeis University. Next, she conducted postdoctoral research at MIT, and she then worked for several years at Omeros Corporation before joining the Allen Institute in 2006. Hongkui has received numerous awards for her work, including the National Academy of Sciences Pradel Research Award, the Gill Transformative Investigator Award from Indiana University, the NIH Brain Initiative Cell Census Network Award, and the Award for Scientific Advancement from the Association for Women in Science. And today, Hongkui, we're excited to get to know you both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
Well, I live in the beautiful city of Seattle. There are a lot of hiking trails. There are a lot of mountains and waters surrounding the city. So I like to go to the mountains, hiking, exploring nature. I also like to go kayaking in the waters. At home, I like to watch movies, shows, listen to music, reading, and just relax.
I love it. Well, it sounds like you've got a wide variety of hobbies, both outside and indoors, to keep you occupied when you're not busy with science. And I'm glad you mentioned reading. We love talking about books on our show. So do you have a favorite book that you'd like to recommend for me and our listeners, whether it's about science or not?
I can talk about a book actually I recently read. It was actually a book that my daughter gave me. It was called Poor Economics. It's about a new way of doing economics, thinking about how to help individuals in countries like India to start their small businesses, especially women in developing countries, and how that would change the economy. It's not about individuals, how helping individuals to seek opportunities to become self-sufficient, what kind of impact that would have to the society. So I really enjoyed it. And it was a book my daughter gave me because she majors in economics. So it was really fun to read something not in my own field.
Oh, Hongkui, I love that. Excellent recommendation. We will add this book, Poor Economics, to our website for our listeners to find there. And I love to hear that you read broadly, because I think that is important as a scientist to kind of not get so stuck in this tunnel vision of just focusing everything in your attention on your own research, but broadening the topics that you're exposed to, I think can be really valuable, not only for yourself sort of developing as a person, but in kind of getting inspired in the science that you do. I know you are doing amazing work in the lab as well. So, Hongkui, how do you describe what you do as a scientist to someone who's not in research or maybe not in your specific research field?
At the Art Institute, our main goal is to focus on understanding the basic question of how the brain is organized and how the different parts of the brain, the different kinds of cells of the brain work together in generating behavior and other kinds of function. So we kind of treat the brain like a complex system or a machine, and we want to break it apart into different components and then see how the different components of the brain work together. So basically, it's looking at the cellular basis of the circuit formation and then how some kind of a function emerges from the circuit. So this may be pretty abstract, but we really try to understand the inner workings of the brain, how brain generates functions through its component. And by doing that, we hope that we'll generate this kind of foundational resource for the community so that the entire scientific research field can begin to apply that kind of foundational knowledge in understanding, for example, how brain function changes under different diseased conditions. So they can apply the foundational knowledge resource that we generated into all kinds of specific problems that people are studying.
Neuroscience is something that I get super excited about, so I'm looking forward to digging into more of the details of your work, Hongkui. But let's talk a little bit about motivation first. I know as a scientist, there are ups, there are downs, and there's a lot of work to do. So do you have a favorite motivational quote or maybe a force that really keeps you motivated and inspired?
I'm driven by curiosity, problem solving. I view the brain as a big mystery. I'm always curious about how it works. I think curiosity is really a big drive, and also then doing something meaningful for the society. So I'm very excited about the work that we do because it's interesting. It's full of mysteries. I feel like we are exploring the unknown all the time. And at the same time, in the end of the day, we also know that whatever we find will be beneficial to people because it's knowledge generation that will be useful some way, somehow down the road.
I love it. Well, I think this force of curiosity and wanting to solve problems and have big impacts on society is a great thing to keep you motivated as a scientist. But also the people that you work with can be pretty motivating and inspiring as well. So Hongkui, when you think about your career, maybe your early days, do you have particular role models, whether they were historical figures or mentors or just people who helped you get to where you are today?
I think my mentors are really great role models for me. They are great scientists, but they are also human beings. I was actually very lucky being able to work with two amazing scientists for my both PhD advisor and my postdoc advisor. It turned out in the end of the day, both of them were actually Nobel laureates.
Oh, wow.
My postdoc advisor was already Nobel laureate for many years before I joined his lab. So I was very curious about how he thought about the problem, how he solved the problem, just the way he approached science. And then my PhD advisor, when I worked with him, he didn't get a Nobel Prize, but 20 years later, after I left the lab, after I got my degree, graduated from the lab, he also got his Nobel Prize. So, of course, they are extraordinary scientists, but at the same time, they are also human beings. They have their way of asking questions. They have deep insights and amazing instinct, asking the right questions. And I think those are really, really important in doing good science, being able to do science in the right way. But at the same time, they make mistakes. In everyday interactions, they also maybe get distracted by certain things, going to the wrong path about how a project should be done, or maybe naive about how things should be done. So I really feel that they are human beings. I learned tremendously about how to do science, how to think about problems. But at the same time, I also feel that they are my fellow scientists. I'm inspired by working with them, but I also don't see a barrier, let's say, between them and me. Maybe this is good for everybody there, especially young scientists there. I think it's really important to know that you can reach your greatest potential. just like everybody else, just like those famous scientists, just like even Nobel laureates. You just need to put your whole heart in it, be genuine about it, and follow your passion. I think that's what I learned from my mentors. I think in the end, it was the case that when I started working with them, I felt like, wow, they are big scientists. But in the end of the day, I feel that it's achievable. I can do this. I gain confidence about myself, and I know that I can ask the right questions, and I know that I can make a difference. I think it's really, really important, especially for young scientists, to gain this kind of a confidence and to be brave about what you want to do and what you want to achieve.
Absolutely. I think don't let fear, don't let intimidation stop you from talking to these scientists, from making your own major scientific impacts and pursuing this career that you're passionate about. So I'm so glad to hear that you had this opportunity to work with some phenomenal scientists along the way, Hongkui. But I'd love to rewind it back perhaps to the beginning. Can you tell us what maybe first sparked your interest in science, and how did you get on this path at first?
I think I was a nerdy kid from the very beginning. I was good at science and math in general, and I was an independent thinker. I had this curiosity. I liked to solve problems. So yeah, science seems like it was a natural path for me.
Absolutely. I loved hearing that you were a curious kid and got interested in this problem-solving science math. When did you start to think about making research a career for yourself?
I think in college, I began to think about what I wanted to do. Making money was not a big goal for me. I think I was driven by what I like to do. And I felt getting an advanced graduate degree and being able to do research was just something that would meet my curiosity. Trying new things and exploring new directions would be something that I was very looking forward to doing.
Absolutely. And after completing your bachelor's degree, you came to the U.S. to do your PhD at Brandeis. What was that transition like for you?
The transition was quite smooth. Fortunately, I had good companions. It was a natural path for some of us, not many, but for some of my friends and people I knew and new friends I made in graduate school who were also Chinese students coming from China, new to America, and going through this graduate studies together. So I felt really fortunate to already have more senior peers in the graduate school at Brandeis, and they gave me a lot of guidance in navigating the graduate school studying and research processes. So I felt very fortunate with that. It's always important to have a community surrounding you, and I felt very lucky that I had that community from the very beginning.
Definitely. And I know, Hongkui, you've had an opportunity to do some fascinating work over the years. I'd love to dig into your research a little bit if we can. So do you have a particular project that you're working on right now that you are just the most excited about that you want to share with me and our listeners?
Yeah, sure. At this moment, I am extremely excited about a cell atlas that we have just created for the entire brain of a mouse.
Oh, wow.
The mouse is the most widely used laboratory research animal model. So this is the first time that we have had a very, very detailed look of all kinds of cells in the entire brain of an animal, especially a mammal, an animal that's very similar to human. Basically, we call it a parts list of the brain. So we know the cellular composition of the brain in every part of the brain, and we know their special genetic characteristics. And we have a very, very detailed, we call it a genetic map or transcriptomic map of all the cells in the brain of a laboratory animal. And this is really the first time it's the prototype of the map of the brain. And from here, we can move on to generate a larger map of the human brain itself. But now we already have the foundation for that.
That is so cool. And Hongkui, this is a major undertaking. How long did it take to get to this point where the atlas is finally complete?
It took us more than 7 years to get to this point.
Oh, wow.
We started with developing technologies, doing pilot proof of principle studies that will allow us to scale up our profiling of individual cells in the brain to profiling millions of cells to cover the entire brain. So from technology development, proof of principle studies, to setting up a pipeline, large-scale data generation, to, in the most recent, the last 2 years, we spent 2 years or longer to analyze the data of thousands of genes per cell from millions of cells. So a tremendous amount of computational data analysis in order to categorize the cells into different types and find out where they are exactly in the brain, what kind of cells are located in which part of the brain, and build the map of the brain together. So it's a tremendous team effort over more than 7 years.
That is amazing. And I know these ambitious research projects, you encounter a lot of challenges sort of at every step of the way, Hongkui. So we love talking about challenges on our show. So do you have a particular challenge that you've encountered that really you were struggling with, or maybe a major failure that you had to recover from that you can tell me and our listeners about in your scientific career?
There are always lots of challenges that we have to overcome in order to make things to work. In my case, I'm really lucky that we have been very often successfully adopting different technologies and take a lot of work to get the different methods optimized and then to make them work. Along the process, I feel like we have made a lot of right decisions about exactly what technologies to use and use a rigorous method to quality control our data and really sticking to high standards. So I think for us, very often the main challenges are in the scaling up of a particular methodology. When you first try it, you get it to work in one person's hand, but maybe that person is just a scientist or a technician who's really skilled at something, and he or she can do the job really well. But then it was not reproducible by other people or a new person coming in. And we really had to figure out how to make the process standardized enough so that any reasonably skilled technicians or scientists will be able to learn the process and being able to generate data in similar level of quality. That took a lot of back and forth to figure out exactly how to do it, and especially what kind of a QC process that will be needed in order to make that happen. For me now, because I'm a senior manager now at the organization, right? I manage many different teams. I don't do experiments directly myself anymore. So the greatest challenge for me is always the coordination across different teams, making sure that the communications across teams are clear and make sure that people work together and make sure that we have a process that we can follow to be able to establish a reliable pipeline that will consistently generate high quality data and make sure that every component of that pipeline, from the initial SOPs, protocols establishment and instrumentation, software packages, to the data generation process itself, and then to data management that facilitates analysis of the data. And then finally, writing up the manuscript for publication and also build an online website that will allow us to make our data freely available to the community. As you can see, I don't deal with a single project anymore. I help to facilitate the coordination of this entire process. And every time we start a new project, adopt a new technology, we have to start over with this whole process again. So that is the kind of everyday challenges that I have. I work with many, many team members together at the Institute to tackle those challenges.
Definitely. Hongkui, I'm so glad you gave us some insight into just the daily grind that is science. I think so many people, when they think about science, they think about those eureka moments when something finally works for the first time or you discover something new. And that's great, but you need to be able to then standardize and systematize things so that you can reproduce things, so that you can kind of, like you said, scale up these sort of processes that you're working on. And I think that is definitely fraught with challenges. One person can get it to work one time, but understanding all those factors that led to it working can be a huge part of the challenge. So I'm so glad you shared this with us, but we don't just want to talk about the challenges. I'd love to talk about successes. You mentioned this Cell Atlas is a recent success. Do you have another success story, whether it's a big win or even a small but particularly meaningful success you'd like to share?
I'm very glad to share another, actually also big success that we had almost 10 years ago now. And it was really a groundbreaking effort that we did at the Institute that was not well appreciated at the time. But the different kind of atlas that we created at the time became a lot more popular and being used very, very often in the field now. And it really set up some new standards for the field. And people now were telling me that the project you did 10 years ago was really ahead of the time. I was very happy to hear that. Mm-hmm. That was actually my first pipeline project that I played a leading role in establishing the Allen Institute. And that was what we called, it's not a cell atlas. It was a connectivity atlas. Of course, it was still a crude resolution, not the ultimate connectivity atlas. We call it a mesoscale connectivity atlas. But it was really the first one in the field. And I was very, very glad that I spearheaded that effort. So maybe I can step back a little bit, just talking about when you asked me about the challenges. When I talk about, scaling up a project or technology to make it into a big science project is really something unique to the Allen Institute. You don't see that often in the research field, especially in biology, biomedical research field. Usually it's one student or postdoc working in an independent research lab, tackling specific scientific problems. But Allen Institute is the place where we establish pipelines, multiple pipelines, and really applying an industrial approach in basic foundational research questions. So the challenges we face are very unique for ourselves and in the field as well.
Definitely. And I know you're doing really cutting edge research there at the Allen Institute. And you mentioned that this accomplishment with the Connectivity Atlas was perhaps not as appreciated at the time as it is now. So what was that like for you to kind of put all that work into this project and then maybe have it kind of fall flat when you put it out there for the world to see?
We started that project back in 2009. And actually my little research group, because that was just 2 years after I joined the Allen Institute, I had only 2-3 people working with me. So my small little research group started a pilot project using recombinant viral tracers to map connections in the brain. So I proposed this idea of creating a mesoscale connectivity atlas across the mouse brain, tracing one pathway at a time, using a standardized fluorescent high-throughput imaging platform that would allow us to image, process hundreds to thousands of individual brains, and then put them all together into this common atlas framework. So we worked on that project it was yet another 6-year project. We had a publication in the end, but it was a big deal at the time. We ended up publishing a major Nature paper because it was the first comprehensive connectivity atlas from the brain. However, many scientists in the field just felt that it was not innovative enough. We were just repeating what had already been done in the field for the past 50, 100 years. In which people did tracing experiments in the brain, understanding the connections in different parts of the brain. All that knowledge existed in the literature. However, it was not put together. So for us, recreating the connections in the brain and put all the data sets together in the online platform, and most importantly, we developed an algorithm that allowed us to co-register those thousands of individual mouse brains together into a single coordinate framework so that we can put the data coming from individual animal brains and put them together into this kind of artificial composite system so that we can compare different pathways in the same spatial framework computationally. So that was actually the really novel part of what we did in building this online computational connectivity atlas that combine the data from thousands of individual data sets from the individual brains together. But people just felt like there were no new insight. It was just a tool, a resource by putting things together, which was why at the time, scientists felt like we were not able to investigate a problem deeply, but it was just like putting up a resource atlas together. But in the end of the day, that atlas was become really, really widely used just because it was standardized and it was freely available online all the time, and it was complete. Basically, it was not bits and pieces of data that you would see from a paper because scientists could not publish everything in a paper. They picked the most salient, important findings in the paper, but they could not show everything. Whereas here in our online database, Atlas, everything was there. So not only you know about what I want to tell you, but you can also navigate and find out other things that I haven't even looked yet. So that was really transformational. And this idea about co-registering the different disparate data together into a common space, that idea just took fire. Now a brain common coordinate framework or any kind of body common coordinate framework became a very well-received idea. Like everybody wants to now register their own data into this common coordinate framework so that they can compare directly their results with other people's results. It became a place to aggregate information together and just basically expand your ability to analyze data, to link the different kinds of data and the knowledge together. So yeah, I feel like it very much started with that Connectivity Atlas project.
Well, I think this is amazing, being able to synthesize all of these different pieces into one project and to make that data then easy for others to access. It really changed how people were answering the questions they were interested in and the kinds of questions they could tackle.
Yeah, exactly. That's why now people told me that thinking back, like what you did 10 years ago was really ahead of time. I was very happy to hear that. I said, oh, okay. I feel like finally our work became so much appreciated.
Well, I'm glad that you are finally getting the kudos that are very well deserved, even if they are a bit late. And Hongkui, I know that you are doing outstanding science there at the Allen Institute. And to do your best science, you need to have high quality lab equipment and supplies. So I'd like to take a moment to thank our episode sponsor, Innovative Research, and to tell you about their portfolio of chemiluminescence immunoassay kits, which offer high sensitivity, specificity, and reproducibility. These kits are designed for research targeting diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, or forensics, as well as environmental monitoring, food safety, and agricultural research. Visit www.innov-research.com to view their entire line of chemiluminescence immunoassay kits. And these kits can be shipped to scientists in labs around the world. And of course, science is a global enterprise. And as a scientist, Hongkui, you get amazing opportunities to travel the world and see new places, whether it is for conferences, invited presentations, or working with collaborators. So do you have a favorite place that your science has taken you?
I have so many favorite places. I don't have a single favorite place, but I've been to so many different countries and interacted with so many different people, mostly still in my field, but the broad neuroscience field. And I've been to all kinds of conferences. I think especially because the work that I do at the Allen Institute is very much foundational, can accelerate research in many different areas, all kinds of diseases, all kinds of functional systems, sensory, motor, emotional, cognitive functions, all these different things. So I got invited to all kinds of conferences. I'm not a, let's say, constant, regular attendee of a particular meeting series, but I got invited into a variety of different types of conferences. And every time I just learn so much from people in that specialized field. So it's hard for me to pick a particular one.
Well, that sounds amazing. Just being able to constantly be meeting new people and learning new things. Do you maybe have an example of a conference you've been to recently within the past couple of years that you really enjoyed?
Yeah. 2 years ago, I went to I think it was the Society for Neuropsychiatry meeting in Puerto Rico. And I gave a plenary lecture there talking about the cell atlasing work we have been doing in the mouse brain and the human brain. And that was a conference that was very much clinically driven. People working on all kinds of psychiatric disorders, as well as some neurological disorders. A lot of clinicians, a lot of people who study different kinds of diseases were at the conference. It was very refreshing to me to be able to interact with them, to think about the specific problems they have in their mind and to brainstorm together with them how to apply the very, very basic foundational knowledge that we have generated about the cells in the brain into their particular type of research in diseases. And to think about what would be the most effective ways of treating the diseases and why, and which areas we need to research further in order to generate real breakthroughs again for specific diseases. That was a very interesting meeting that I recently went to have the opportunity to discuss with clinicians about the different kind of diseases and how to apply what we have learned in our work into their work.
Definitely. I think fostering these conversations between clinical researchers and basic scientists and maybe just other interdisciplinary conversations as well is really critical to advancing science and addressing some of these real world problems that are out there. And I know Puerto Rico is not a bad place to go. So how was your experience there?
Wonderful. It was a meeting in December, so I enjoyed the nice warm weather very much.
Did you get outside the conference hall and explore a little?
Yeah, I went on a walk on the beach. It was nice. I believe it was December 2021. So it was just soon after kind of the end of pandemic. We were actually also very happy to help with the economy over there by beginning to have conferences.
Absolutely. I know the pandemic completely disrupted conferences, travel, a lot of people's plans. And it was really refreshing, I think, to jump back into travel and being able to see colleagues and people in person again.
Yeah.
I know we talked about some different aspects of your life as a scientist, and I think people don't always get to see the real humans behind the science. So we love to showcase that on our show. And I think in the media, scientists are often portrayed as being very serious, very critical, these white lab coated people always working in the lab. And I think that's not the case when you get to sort of the reality of these funny, amazing, creative people who are actually doing the science. So Hongkui, when you think back about all the different labs that you've been a part of, or maybe what's going on at the Allen Institute now, are there particular quirky traditions or maybe just funny experiences or a story that you could tell us about that shows a different side of science than people may get to see in the media often?
There are many small stories of those, I guess. Scientists are not just serious, dorky people. I mean, we do lots of fun things as well. We do a lot of little fun things. We have our happy hours. We actually like to, maybe on Thursday afternoon or Friday afternoon, we like to go to the bars and chat with each other. We have one particularly popular thing is the tea time. At the Allen Institute, we have a Thursday afternoon tea time where we have nice tea, cookies, things like that prepared, and people just gathered to chat together. We have Halloween parties every year. Halloween costume competition. That was always serious events.
So you mentioned Halloween parties, Hongkui. Are you a particularly competitive costume designer?
Not much.
You're not shooting for the podium in those?
I use costumes my kids used. So yeah, I'm a modest person.
Now, were there any particular traditions in the lab when you were doing your PhD with Michael Rosbash at Brandeis or your postdoc maybe with Susumu Tonagawa at MIT?
So my PhD advisor had this sense of humor. He collects jokes. He had a notebook in which he collected all kinds of jokes. And he, at the beginning of each talk that he gave, it was always a joke. He always had to start a scientific seminar with a joke. So that became a tradition for the lab. So everybody in the lab, every trainee, graduate student, postdoc knew that, yes, it is very important that you present good results in your talk, but it's yet more important that you present a good joke in your talk.
Extra points for making the PI laugh, right?
Yeah. So it was actually a tremendous pressure for the lab members, the students and postdocs, and try to think about what jokes they're going to talk about. They search and collect Anyway, and of course we had Christmas parties and we play Secret Santa. And you had to prepare a funny present to the person. So that was another challenge as well. We had a lot of fun. I had a great time in 5 years in the lab. But when I finally graduated from his lab, moved on, I also felt relieved that I didn't have to worry about preparing for jokes, that seriously anymore.
Well, it sounds like perhaps that was not a tradition that you brought with you to the Allen Institute, but I love the idea of having just this pervasive sense of humor and fun and playfulness in your science. And I think, like you said, this person ultimately went on to become a Nobel laureate.
20 years later. Yeah.
Exactly. You can be a fun scientist and still be incredibly successful in science as well.
Exactly. You're right.
Well, we've talked about some of the major projects that you've tackled there at the Allen Institute, but I know even there can be barriers, whether it's funding, staff, technology, feasibility, or even just time, Hongkui. So if we took away all of the barriers that normally stand in your way, what is the one research question you would want to answer or the one problem you'd want to solve?
I think in the end of the day, if I have the ability, I still hope that I can work on a disease problem and find a way to treat, alleviate that disease, even if I am not able to cure it. That's something that I really hope that I can do. I can make a real difference to somebody in the world. Right now, what we do is foundational work in understanding how brain works. And that endeavor can be endless. We all often ask ourselves, what do you mean by understanding? How can you demonstrate that you have understood something? And where is the end? Maybe there's no end, and that's totally fine. That's how the society moves forward. That's how we just broaden our knowledge just more and more with time, and eventually that will bring benefit. But I would still, if possible, and I'm very proud to be a part of that huge endeavor. But in the end of the day, I would still hope that in my lifetime, I can do something tangible. I can see tangible outcome, tangible result out of the work that I do.
Definitely. I think that's something that a lot of scientists feel is you put in this daily grind every day and you may be developing tools or you may be creating things that others use, but you don't necessarily get to see those real world impacts yourself, or it may just take years and years and years to get to that point.
It takes many years to get to that. From foundational research to clinical research to clinical trials to eventually get a drug working. It's many generations work involving many, many people with different specialties, expertise. But I would love to be able to generate a tangible result with my own hands. I would love to do that.
Well, Hongkui, you've got time, so make it happen. I know me and our listeners look forward to continuing to following your work and seeing what you do over time. And I know you've shared so much with us today. I'd love to end with advice. So do you have a piece of advice, Hongkui, that someone gave you at some point in your life that really helped you that you can share with our listeners today?
I think one piece of advice which I got from my postdoctoral advisor and which I thought was really true and I followed is this. Paraphrasing, it's just, general idea, but it's kind of the message that he conveyed, which I also now try to convey to other scientists as well. And that is, it takes the same amount of effort to do an unimportant thing as to do an important thing. So make your choice wisely. Don't think that it will be easier if you just work on something that is unimportant. Of course, you can define what is important to you and what is not important to you, but don't just get yourself busy on things that are just trivial or just because you think that they're easier to do. In the end of the day, you really need to figure out what is the most important thing that you want to do and then just focus on that. It will be worthwhile in the end. Don't waste your time on things that are not worthy of pursuing. Just because they are apparently easier or something like that, it is actually not worth it. So think hard about what is worthy of your time and effort to do. I think that was a really good piece of advice to me. And I felt like I have followed that advice throughout my life. Making the right choice is really important.
Well, Hongkui, I think that is phenomenal advice. And I think it really hits home that you have a limited amount of both time and energy, and you really want to be making choices about how you spend it doing the things that are most important to you and the things that will have the biggest impact, not just sort of the busy work of everyday life.
Yeah, you summarized it very well.
Well, I love that advice. Is there any other last piece of advice or maybe a last note of inspiration that you'd like to leave our listeners with at the end of our conversation today?
One thing I like to talk about these days is about being humble, especially as a leader. And as I am, becoming more of a leader, taking up more responsibilities, as I myself am becoming a role model, I think it's very important for me as well as other leaders to show our vulnerabilities. Being humble, showing that we're not Superman or Superwoman. We are just like everybody else. It personalizes everybody so that people can relate with each other. And also, I think it provides a different kind of inspiration to young people, young scientists, that you can realize your goals, you can realize your dreams. And just as long as you work at it, work towards your goals. We are all the same human beings. We all have our vulnerabilities. We all have our own humble side. And I want to break that barrier. I want our people to be able to move up and realize the dreams they have.
Absolutely. I think sometimes you yourself can be the biggest barrier you face, right? That idea that you're not good enough, that you can't make it, that you can't do these things, when actually, in so many cases, I think you can.
Exactly.
Well, Hongkui, thank you so much for sharing that message with us. If our listeners are curious and they want to learn more about you and the wonderful work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to do so?
The easiest way would be for people to Google me. You will find pages and pages information about me. You'll find my LinkedIn site. You'll find my Twitter account. You'll find my Google Scholar site. And most importantly, you'll find my personal site at the Art Institute webpage. So yeah, just Google my name. And if you want to contact me, you will be able to find my email address. So I'm accessible.
Perfect. Well, Hongkui, thank you so much for sharing those resources. And listeners, definitely take some time to learn more about Hongkui and the amazing work that the Allen Institute. And Hongkui, it was such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was really a pleasure talking to you today, Mary.
Well, it was wonderful to have you here. And listeners, great to have you here with us as well. And we hope you join us again for our next episode of People Behind the Science.